editor's friend for you. And then they help you find a cool publisher. So my cool publisher is Little Brown. If anyone is reading like Internment by Samira Ahmed, or Holy Black, The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, or are you too young for Twilight? Twilight was so huge when I was a kid.
Yeah, that's a little before their time. It was huge about 10 years ago.
This is Little Brown. They're doing all of these books. So they're huge on young adult stuff. Let's see. And I spent like 1.5 years working with Little Brown between when I signed my book and when it came out into the world. So, do you have any questions about like what happens in publishing? Or processes? Yes.
This isn't exactly like a publishing question, more like a writing question. What motivated you to write? Like, how did you keep yourself writing in the first place about all that process?
How did I keep myself writing in the first place? So I did 2 things. The first thing I did was I thought, if I don't do it now, I'll never get it done, right? I always really wanted to be an author, and so it sometimes felt like every day that I didn't do something, I was letting my dream slip away from me. I know for other people, they do it by rewards. Like, if I write this chapter, I'll go make cookies or something fun like that. So, different ways to motivate. The other thing is, this book that I wrote is based off of a real story. It's based off of the story of Russian airwomen called the Night Witches, who would fly airplanes during World War II. They would drop bombs on German front lines, and it was something that I've always loved, history, but it was a story in history that I'd never heard before. And so whenever I got demotivated, I would go read more about it. And then I would get super excited because this is the coolest history I've ever read, these amazing Russian airwomen. So those are my 2 ways of getting motivated.
Did you tell the summary already about the book?
I haven't talked about the book yet.
What?
I can talk about the book.
I can ask you questions at the end. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this is based off of this true story of the Night Witches. This is a story about 2 girls and the friendship that they cultivate together. It's about this world that's in a state of total war. It's based off of Russia, so it's cold, it's miserable, and everyone has a very specific place. And one main character, Revna, she is a double amputee. She has 2 below-knee prosthetics, and she works in a factory, and she has this illegal magic that she uses in secret. And one day during a bomb raid, she gets caught using this illegal magic. Luckily for her, there is a new base, a new airwomen's regiment being formed that uses this kind of magic to fight back. So she gets offered this chance. You can go to prison, or you can go and fight for this country that needs you. So she goes. She's joined by the other main girl, Lene, who always wanted to fight, but only men could fight in the army. So she dressed up like a boy. Then she got caught, and they said, you can go home, or you can fight in this all-women's air regiment. So they come from 2 very different worlds. They hate each other, they have to work together, and they also have to learn how to deal with a new form of army that doesn't think that women belong anywhere. So there's a lot of, I would say there's a lot of feminism in the book, and a lot of pushback against sort of regular gender norms as presented by the world. So, like I said, it's based off a true story. In 1941, Hitler brought Russia into World War II, and during that time, it was such a state of total war. My first very unfun fact of the day, 80% of the men who were born before World War I were dead by the end of World War II. There was so many people who were totally destroyed by this war. And because there was such a state of total war, Stalin was pretty interested when a woman came up to him and said, hey, I want to make 3 regiments of women who fly for the Air Force. And he agreed to let her do it, and she made these 3 regiments. And my book is based off of the Night Witches. They flew like these training planes that were totally outdated. These training planes were so terrible that Germans could shoot them down from the ground. They could just point their gun and shoot, basically. They were so slow that German airplanes couldn't catch them because if they slowed down enough to catch them, the German engines would stall out. They couldn't actually catch these planes because they were so slow. And they would dive bomb, or essentially bomb the night lines by going up, cutting their engines, diving down, and dropping bombs on the front lines. And the Germans gave them their nickname of the Night Witches because they said the engine sounded like a broom when it kicked back into gear. So this was an amazing story. The most devastating thing about it is that when the war was over, the Soviet Union essentially obliterated all trace of them and pretended it had never happened. And only in like the 80s did literature start to appear in English about the Night Witches and about what they did. So I got really excited about learning about it. I think it's something that's really worth learning more about if you want to check it out. There's loads of books on it now, written in English for people, lots of interviews with the women. And it's a really, to me, it's a really cool subject. And I really wanted to put it down in fiction and fantasy because that's what I like to write the most. I like writing fantasy. So that was me and my book.
All right, so if you guys had some questions then, just since we started.
Yes.
Okay, what advice would you have for like, is this working?
Yes.
What advice would you have for people like us who are younger who want to write?
Okay, I prepared for this question, but I still don't know how to distill it all down. Like, so the first thing I'll say is it's a long-term thing, writing. Like, everything takes a long time. Like, it's a long time till you're ready to be published. It's a long time before people buy your stuff. It's a long time before anything happens. So go in it for the long term, right? I'll also say it's totally okay just to write as a hobby. I think that if you write because you love it, then you'll be able to take anything that comes your way. And it, like, there is a lot of rejection that piles up against you. You should definitely read and write every day. And I think that having an open mind towards learning is super important. I'm still taking writing classes right now because there's always more that you can learn. So definitely thinking about how we can improve. It's really interesting to see reviews coming out. That's like, you can look at it, you can see what people are saying, and you can see how you still need to improve on books that are totally published, which is kind of fun. Does that answer the question? Cool.
What's your daily habit look like? Do you just set a certain amount of time
What's
that
my
you write
daily habit look
for
like?
writing?
Yeah.
Your routine?
So in real life, I'm a tour guide. Real life. So I do like 4 hours of touring and walking around a day. When I'm doing tours, which is like every day during the summer and very little during the winter, I try to write when I get home from touring. And that's usually in the afternoon. I like to set a daily goal of like 200 words. 250 words is about a page, right? Double-spaced page. And one piece of wisdom I learned from my favorite author was that if you write one page every day for 1 year, at the end of the year, you will have a finished novel. And 365 pages, by the way, is larger than this. So it's a lot. It adds up. And that's a huge part of it. Like, sometimes a year seems like a hugely long time, but you blink and you're there. So writing every day. When I am not tour guiding, I'll get up at like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'll go sit at the computer and I'll write as much as I can. One of the biggest things about developing my career was realizing when I'm most productive, and I'm most productive at like from 7 to 10 in the morning. After 10 o'clock, I can write maybe half in like the rest of the day that I wrote between those 3 hours. So daily routine is great, but I think for a lot of people, if we have like a day job, it's not always easy to maintain it. So definitely prioritizing writing a little bit is the most important thing.
Tell them about your, do you know where she lives? She grew up here in Colorado, but where she's living now?
Yeah, I don't think I said. So I grew up in Arvada, and then I moved 8 years ago to Copenhagen, to Denmark. So that's where I live and give tours. So if you're ever in Denmark, you can come get a tour from me. Yes. Do I speak Danish? Depends on who you ask. Yeah. So Denmark is a really interesting place with a really ridiculous language. if you know how to say something, you don't necessarily know how to read it. Can I use a visual aid?
Yeah, and I was gonna give you a
Yeah.
marker if you wanna write on this
Cool.
board here.
Yes.
Here's a Cheresse.
Okay.
And if you put your email address on there, so
Yeah, I
if
can do
you guys wanna send questions and stuff. We're gonna add her to our Facebook group too for the book club, and she'll get you an email that you can ask questions.
We'll leave the sign more on. Okay, so this is my favorite word in Danish. How would you pronounce this word? In Danish, it's pronounced 30.
Wow.
30. It means 30. I learned how to count before I learned how to read this number, and I felt like such a fool when I realized how it was spelled. So, Danish is really challenging. It's one of the most challenging languages.
If someone, so I know there's a relationship between.
Where's the
Yeah, let's do it so that other people can hear the question too.
off at the moment? So I don't know how to.
You got the green light on, it's working.
Yes.
Okay, so I know there's a relationship between Swedish and Norwegian, but could you understand someone if you're speaking Swedish and you're speaking Danish?
Can I understand someone if they're speaking Swedish and I'm speaking Danish? No.
Okay.
The language is about 80% the same.
Yeah,
so
that's why I was
similarity.
wondering.
All the Scandinavians will tell you that they can understand each other. It's not true. Especially Danes. We don't understand anything the Swedes and Norwegians say. They just pretend that they do, and then they give wrong directions to the wrong place. So it's really like language is really interesting in that like part of the world because there are huge language similarities.
Yeah.
In a way that English isn't really similar to other languages, but they sound totally different.
Does living in Denmark affect your, did that affect your writing? Did you draw inspiration from where you're currently living?
Denmark affect my writing? Definitely, yes. So I wrote like a short story based off of a Hans Christian Andersen story. Hans Christian Andersen was Danish. Yes, I based the story off The Little Match Girl, and I set it in a post-apocalyptic Copenhagen. I've used Copenhagen as a big setting because Copenhagen is hugely different to here. Like, it's really muggy and humid, and it's all like ground level, so like there are canals everywhere, and people live in constant terror that we'll all get flooded and die when the apocalypse comes. And like there's no mountains anywhere. There's loads of old buildings, but it's a totally different atmosphere to Colorado. So yes, definitely. Yes.
So when you were working on that book, did you ever like work on other books or other pieces?
When I was working on this book, did I work on other books or pieces? Not really. So I've written like 4 complete books before this that I never sent out to try and get published. This one really took up a lot of my energy. One of the things that other writers will suggest to writers, especially when you're trying to get an agent or an editor, is to work on something new. And I did that a little bit. That's going to be my 2nd novel coming out in 1 year. But I've also done I try to do a lot of short stories. I personally think that short stories are the best way you can practice writing. They're really great. They basically have the same format as writing a novel. Like with basically you have a character who goes through some stuff and changes. But you can write more of them in theory in the same amount of time, so you can get more feedback on what your writing is and how you're, like maybe what you're not as good at, and you can work on changing it. So I do short stories. Yeah. Yes.
Were you ever able to like meet one of the night witches that was in the brigade?
Was I ever able to meet one of the night witches? Sadly, no. They've all passed away by now. The last one passed away in like the early 20-teens. So by the time I found out about them in 2014, and I think she died in 2012. Yes. All right.
Maybe you can repeat the
So,
question
yeah.
because they can't hear
The
it.
question was, what was some other research that I had to do? So I said before, one of my main characters is a double amputee. You can see that I'm not. So I did research on like what it is, like what mobility you lose when you have a below knee amputation versus above knee amputation. I read memoirs of people who became double amputees and wanted to talk about their experiences. And I got someone to read it as well, to see what was, like, where things weren't really right. I did that. I read a lot about Russia, of course. I read a beautiful, terrifying book about the Romanovs. If anyone's really into, like, Game of Thrones, you should definitely read about the Romanovs. They're terrible people. I read about, it's a hot take. I read about a lot of World War II tactics in general, and I had to do a lot of environmental reading because of the setting, the cold. Russia is mostly composed of taiga, which is a particular kind of swampland, and it just has a different atmosphere than Colorado's cold. Very cool. Yes?
Have you ever been to Russia?
Not yet.
Can you repeat the question?
Have I ever been to Russia? I've been to Russian-owned territories, but I haven't been to Russia at this time. I'm working on it. Yes?
Have you gotten any feedback from Russian readers?
Have I gotten any feedback from Russian readers? Not yet that I know of. But I will say, a Russian publisher has bought the rights to translate my book into Russian. So I'm very happy about that. Yes? Question?
How do you decide what the cover art's going to be?
How do I decide what the cover art's going to be? I don't. Okay, so I did not decide anything. Around this time last year, I got my first cover idea. It was 1000% different from what we see now. It was a completely different cover. And it had a completely different name on the novel as well. So I chose the original title of the novel. They made a cover. They ran it by people, like readers and booksellers, and everyone said, nah, we don't like it. It's very boring. And so luckily my publisher went back and said, how do we make it more interesting? So 4 months later, they said, this is your new cover now, and I had no idea what it was going to be. Luckily, I think it is the greatest cover of all time. They also chose this name. I didn't like it in the beginning. I think it sounds like a vampire novel, which there's nothing wrong with vampire novels, but I don't have any vampires in here. And I was really worried about it. But it's one thing I never anticipated from publishing. I have not chosen the title for any of the novels that are getting published by me between this year and next year. There was a question?
I was thinking, what was the title originally?
What was the original title? The original title was Our Realm is the Night, which might make sense if you read the book, but people thought it was a little bit of a mouthful on the cover. I have to say, I'm very bad at coming up with titles for stories. Luckily, if you are the same, it doesn't matter. Your publisher will choose it for you, so it's fine. So there are a lot of interesting things that you don't end up having to think about as an author. But there's also, I think when we start writing as a hobby and something that we love to do, we think of it as a very personal thing. It's a very solitary endeavor. And when you start publishing with other people, it stops being solitary. Other people have a handle on what you're doing. And my editor had huge changes that she wanted to make to this book. I had another offer from another editor who wanted to make huge, completely different changes to this book. So you do end up suddenly having a very personal thing that becomes very public, and you end up having to work together and compromise and see what people like best about it, which is a really fascinating experience when you're used to working alone.
Do you mind putting your email address up there? They can
I can
send
put
you
my email.
questions, or
Yes.
Twitter, or however they can contact you.
Twitter is a bit of a mess.
Instagram, whatever you want them to use. So if you have more questions, because what usually happens, as soon as you leave, then they have all these questions that come up, and I don't know the answers, obviously. So this way they can get a hold of you guys. We'll post it. Jessica will put it in the group notes. Right? That would be awesome. And then if you have a chance to go to some of these events coming up this weekend, sounds like that's fine. One's in Loveland, one's in Golden.
Yeah, Liquid Denver West.
Denver West, yeah.
The one tomorrow, I'll give a talk, maybe a little bit more detailed talk about the Night Witches. And then there will be another Q&A discussion thing, and I'll sign copies. Denver West is going to be way more informal, so if you have just questions, it's I'll just be there to answer questions and sign books.
And there'll be copies if they want to buy them. I could only get one copy, but they'll be
Okay,
at the
yeah, there
Barnes
should
and
be
Noble.
copies, especially at the one in Loveland. They've ordered a bunch of copies.
So you can get an autographed copy yourself if you want one. Let's get a picture real quick with our author, because she was supposed to come out here. Do you mind?
I would love a picture.
So let's put
I
her
wanna
kind of
give
in
you
the
my camera
middle,
for a picture.
and we'll have you guys all stand here. We can sit on the table or something like that if you need to. Let's put her right in the middle, like next to Julian there, between you two. So, and then you guys stand up behind her on the sides.